with that in mind, we're going to go in now and talk about some data management things in Park Plus. So how do we manage data? What are some of the limitations of it? What are some of the challenges? And I sent some of y'all that are on the call some questions about this, the folks that have been using this a little bit longer. And if you don't mind, chime in and kind of give us your thoughts on things, and we'll build off of that as we go. So with that, today, Introduction to Data Management. We'll do a refresher on what is the data of Park Plus, what it consists of, how it's collected and maintained, and this is from our end, but also what we've learned from some of our other users that have been doing this for a while. How to protect your data. So that's a big one, making sure we don't mess up global data for our community or university, but also protecting the data that you've invested time in to develop these scenarios. And then we'll get into the updating of data process, and we have a couple of examples. One being manual, which is just line by line, cell by cell, going in and updating data, and that's kind of recommended for small scale analysis part, as well as semi-automated updating, which is larger scale updating of all your parking data or all your land use data and how that looks. And then we'll talk a little bit about what's next in this webinar series, as well as what's out there with the user group to kind of keep you all engaged and informed. So moving right along, in terms of data, you know, I was searching online for some information about data and the importance of it, and I found this quote a while back. Data that is loved tends to survive, and that falls right into the category of how we view it in Park Plus. If you maintain the data and you keep control of the data, and you keep your land use up to date, and you keep your parking information up to date, your Park Plus model is going to be much more valuable to you in the analysis process. So that's not to say that you need to be spending every day doing this, but if you wait 2 years to go into the next analysis, it's going to be a lot tougher to update the data and keep things up to date in Park Plus. So we're trying to keep people motivated and engaged to keep this thing going as they think about how to use that data. So the data of Park Plus. So if you'll remember from your training, there really are two pieces of data. There are land use data and there are parking data. And those have different components as a part of the data that goes into it, but it's really very simple. So with that, let's just take a look at what that data is. So I'll go right into Park Plus. So we're in GIS now, and again, we're looking at Arizona State's model right now because it's the last one we've been working on. And when you look at this map, the brown shapes on the map are land use, and then the gray shapes are going to be the parking. And when we go in and look at the actual data that's part of this, with land use, bring my screen over. With land use, there are really only a few pieces of data that are important for the actual manipulation of the model. There's the type of use. So for example, in this model, there's administrative, there's classroom, there's student residential, there's retail, and then with those, there's also the square footage of that use, the units that are associated with that use, and then a column that we call value, and that's basically looking at what the type of use is. If it's square footage based, that's the square footage associated with that unit. If it's dwelling unit based, it's the dwelling unit. If it's seats based, it's the seats. So those are the pieces of data that go along with the land use. And so when you're updating this, you'll either go through incrementally and update infrastructure on your campus or buildings in your downtown that are associated with development that have these pieces of information, or you may go through and add in a new infrastructure layer or a new parcel layer that's associated with something that your planning department or public works may do, and you may have to go in and just make sure that these fields are valid and are in those parcel updates or infrastructure updates. So really the most important takeaway from that is there are a handful of fields, and there are naming conventions associated with each of your models that are associated with these fields. So again, for our friends over here at Arizona State, you've got the name, the use, the value, the square footage, and all of those have a specific name that go back to the database that runs Park Plus. And each of you have specific naming categories based on the land use data that you gave us. The other piece of, yes.
But this is, Jim, that the field that you have user Is that the same thing or equivalent to the user type that we see on the on Park Plus, that tab that says user, when we were using for us it was either museum or something else. Is that any relationship one to the other?
So there is somewhat, and I'll show you. So this is what Cynthia's talking about. So there's a parking allocation by user type, and mine looks a little different than what yours does because we're running through some new development. But you have user types. So again, for ASU, the 5 user types are their faculty, their students, their administration, their visitors, their student residents. So the way we set this up is specific uses go with specific users. So in Cynthia's case, with the City of Houston, again, they have museum, they have district visitors, they have hospital, they have regular or general users. Each of those goes back to a specific land use. So hospital obviously goes with medical office or hospital uses, whereas the district visitors goes with the park and the golf course and the zoo, kind of the visitor-based demand land uses. So they're not specifically tied together. So if I open this up here, you'll see that there's not one-to-one. So administration is not the same as administration here, but you can certainly use these values to populate the fields in these allocations by user type. And if I go further down, you'll see that there are several uses. So I've got your performing arts theater, restaurant, student residential for ASU's campus, and we don't have all of those uses. Student residence we do, but restaurant, performing arts theater would have to fall under another use category. So again, we do use that for a relationship, but it's not one-to-one. But good question. Thank you, Cynthia. When I'm looking at parking, on the other hand, parking has specific categories built into it. So for us, the base information that's associated with this is the number of spaces, the parking type, and each of you have individual parking types in your downtown or your campus. And so for ASUs, there's 5 different parking types, and they relate back to administration, faculty, visitor, student residential parking, and they go back to permit types. And so when we set their model up, we used it based on permit types that were on their campus. We have hourly, daily, monthly prices, and again, you may have different naming conventions, but it's basically a transient price, a daily price, or a monthly, or in this case, a permit price for ASU, and then the name. And then in most of your data fields, you'll have a series of parking occupancy fields, which I think we have turned off. So if I turn those back on, we'll turn those on for you so you can see what it looks like. So you've got occupancy values for each of the hours of the day for each of the facilities. So starting at 5 a.m., running through 11 p.m., ASU's got parking occupancy. And again, that's based on the data that we have for their campus. For your municipality, you may have 8 hours throughout the day, or you may have 5 hours in the afternoon. It all depends on what was collected and what was used to calibrate the model. One of the other pieces of data that's interesting is when you're looking at this, you may have layers of data built on top of each other. So, for example, this lot number 16 on ASU's campus, there's one location for lot 16, but it's been broken into 4 distinct pieces to have student, faculty, administration, and visitor parking associated with it. And each has its own permit pricing or hourly daily pricing spaces that are associated with it. So we've basically taken and layered that parking facility so that geospatially it's all the same parking, but in terms of attributes, it's different. So that's kind of a general overview about the data. Are there any questions about kind of the general structure of the data before we get into how to collect it and how to protect it and manage it? I think Matt's typing a question over here. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and we'll address that one as we get there. So, moving into how is the data collected and maintained? Well, we've talked about, good question. So Matt asked, what is the difference between occupancy 6 a.m. and calibrated occupancy 6. So you may see the questions in your webinar thing over there. So if I go back to my Park Plus model, and I go into here, let me go back into the fields and turn those on real quick. All right, so if I go into the attribute table, you'll see what Matt was talking about. We have all these occupancy values that I just showed you, and then we have another set of fields called cal occupancy. So what this means is the occupancy value, so occupancy underscore 6 a.m., that's the data that was actually collected in the field, or the data that you would go and update. So whenever you're updating your model, you would update those fields that have occupancy underscore some number. And again, different naming conventions for different people. It may have occupancy and then 1 through 24. Based on how it was set up. Some of them were set up on military time, some of them were set up on AM, PM. But those are the fields that you would update. All of your models will have these fields, cal, occ, underscore, and a number. And that's actually the output from Park Plus. So when you run the model, that's where the numeric values of projections are being stored for each parking facility. Or if you calibrate the model, that's where the numeric values of the calibration for the parking facility are stored. So you won't do anything with these calibrated occupancy fields, and if you do, and you run the model, Park Plus is going to override that because that's where it stores the results of its calculations. So the basic answer is those first leading numbers are the data points that you use in your model, and the second set of numbers are the projections or results of that. All right, so back to the discussion of data collection. So again, the maintenance of data, GIS affords us a really robust data management, data maintenance system. So everything's in shape files, everything's in an attribute table, and there's secondary benefits for you that will allow you to have database management, database storage, where you can go in and understand what's happening with your lots or your land uses outside of just running projections of Park Plus. But everything is stored and maintained in those shape files, which are saved in file geodatabases that are packages for Park Plus. So if you'll remember from the training, most everything is saved down locally on your C drive until you export it out to send to your colleagues that you're working with. And all of that is saved down in shapefile format in file geodatabases so that all of that data is compiled. And we'll talk about that again in a second because that's important for the protection of your data. In terms of maintaining data, you're able to go in and maintain data through a number of sources. Most people are doing it through manual data collection. I go back to Fort Collins, who's one of the first users of this model. They do manual data collection a couple times a year and are able to plug that parking occupancy data into their shape files and update and recalibrate. We have other users who are using license plate recognition to pull occupancy data, which is how we're doing it now, or using revenue control equipment to pull transaction data, whether that's on street or off street, getting ingress egress reports or transaction data and using that for time of day occupancy. When it comes to the land uses, most everybody we're working with, the land uses are updated using parcel information from your municipality or infrastructure information from your planning departments or infrastructure departments on campus. There are a few of us that are using it that have to update that manually on our own, and it kind of becomes a piecemeal update as new information comes in rather than an annual updating process. So one last thing before we start looking at examples. So protecting your data, and I'll talk a little bit about this. I've got my colleague Aaron Gentle on the phone, and Aaron is a GIS professional. Is very big in the development of this Park Plus model and has been kind of one of the partners in this. And some of y'all may have talked to her or met her, but she's helping us develop processes and practices to maintain data and protect data and improve the workflow of Park Plus. And Aaron, jump in wherever you see fit. Like I said, your data is backed up locally, so everything's stored down onto your C drive in a root folder under Park Plus. So all of your scenarios you've been working in, all of the data that you have is stored there until you export it out through the interface and save it somewhere else. And the reason we did this, the number one primary reason we did this, was to not allow Park Plus users to go in and override community-specific data. When we thought about parcels in particular, public works, planning departments work on parcel data for years and years and years, and we didn't want somebody that was using Park Plus to go in and override it and change things for a scenario and lose data that's valuable to the community. But it does present some limitations in terms of where the data is accessed and stored and sharing data between communities. And the folks at the City of Durham can probably attest. We talked last week or a couple weeks ago when I was there. There needs to be some data protocols in place for you to be able to share this amongst yourselves and store it locally. Kurt just asked, it's okay that we store our data in a geodatabase. Absolutely, it's okay. That's how it's stored for us, is in a file geodatabase. And then you can pull data from that geodatabase into Park Plus, and it really is looking for the two pieces of data that I described previously, the land use and the parking. So absolutely fine where you store it. Just know that the scenario data that you're working in is saved on a C drive somewhere, and to bring it back to that geodatabase, you may have to export it and re-import it into the geodatabase to get it back where it needs to be. Another protection for your data is the baselining of files. So in a lot of your models, you'll see that there are, in the scenario catalog, which is the area where all the scenarios are, you'll see that some of those are bold and read-only. And the reason for that is that's what we use to calibrate your model. And we set those as protected files so that you can always go back to them at any point and pull that data back out. So if you've changed things for 6 months and you decide, I want to go back to the original, it's there. Also, when you recalibrate your data, which is the next logical step after updating your data, you'll also calibrate or baseline that file as well. So you'll be able to pull from that. So whenever you baseline a file, you'll always have that somewhere as protected original data. And I'll show you what that looks like here, and then on the next Lunch and Learn in the next month or so, we're going to go through the actual calibration process and what you can do to update your model. And so finally then, just always a good idea whenever you're messing with anything in Park Plus, it's always a good idea to do a copy and then update. Whether you're doing a new scenario, whether you're managing data, just copy the scenario you're working from and use that as an update. And that way, you always have something to go back to as a previous iteration of your analysis. So let's take a look at that, and I'll show you what that means. So when we're in Park Plus, you're in the interface. This is the scenario catalog that I talked about, where I've got my ASU files. If I wanted to go in and update data for this ASU existing, which is one of the files that I created as part of the development process, I don't really want to update in that file because I'd like to keep that for my records and to always go back to. So I simply just do a copy, and it takes everything that's associated with that file, not only the data, but all of the attributes, all of the allocations, all of the relationships we've set up, and it copies that with it. And so then I can go in and start working with that and make my updates. And it's just like doing a save as in a Word document. Always a good idea to have your work separate from previous work so you're not overriding things. And we've learned that the hard way here, setting up models for a lot of y'all where we've gone in and made changes and had to go back and rebuild because we overrid something else. So that's just something good to think about. So we're kind of at a logical stopping point right here before we go into the maintenance of data. So I'll ask a question real quick before we go forward. For some of y'all that are on the phone now, here's a few questions. How are you managing data now in the model? What are some of the limitations to updating land use or parking that you've experienced? And what are some opportunities that you are thinking about? And so I'd like to open it up and have anybody jump in that's doing stuff with the model and give us a little feedback.
Hey Brett, this is Mario with the City of Houston.
All right.
So we've only developed that one scenario that we've worked, which y'all have helped us quite a bit on for the museum district. So we haven't really been challenged with some of the things that you've been talking about because we've just been working in one scenario, and we always do a save as and copy the original one so we don't override. I had a question though about the calibration.
Sure.
My question, and maybe I'm jumping ahead to your next Lunch and Learn, but is there anything in the calibration what I understand is that we put in our actuals, whatever parking counts we have, and then the calibration is some kind of, you know, algorithm happening in the background that says this is how I'm going to forecast it out. Do those calibrations have to be adjusted or changed, developed, depending on the scenario that you're working on? So, like we just did the museum district, when I go into, let's say, East Downtown, I've got a different scenario now. I've got a stadium that I'm dealing with, and I've got a nighttime economy. Is that calibration stay the same, or am I jumping ahead to your next session that you're planning?
You're jumping ahead. I'll give you the overview, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts with it. But calibration is largely based on the mixture of land uses that you've got.
Okay.
So when you go to East Downtown, you're going to have a new mixture of land uses, so that's certainly going to affect the calibration. It's also based on the parking occupancies that you input. So when you build a parking shapefile for East Downtown, there will be distinct parking spaces and occupancy and users that are associated with that. So those are the two data points, and it'll certainly affect calibration. And then the two big things that really drive calibration from making sure the model is set up appropriately standpoint are the relationships between public and private land uses and how those are set up, and then the walking distances for your users. So in your example, you're going to have East Downtown. You're going to need to create some new user types because you're obviously not going to have museum visitors and district visitors and hospital visitors in the East Downtown. And so for each of those visitors that users that you'll have in the East Downtown, you'll create walking distances, and there's a vetting process. And most of you are working with the older calibration process, which is fine, but it's just vetting through the walking distance. And we're going to show you next time. We've created a kind of a new interface with calibration that allows you to see some of the numeric values when you're testing it, because it's a little bit of an iterative process where you'll go through and test it, and it's right or it's off a little bit, and you go through and change some of the walking distances or the allocation patterns. And so in advance of that, yes, changing area, you're going to change calibration, and we want to give you the tools when we talk next time to be able to go in and do that yourself. And I did that with y'all in mind because I know y'all are going to go to 20 different neighborhoods at some point, and I know you're going to need that information.
And Brett, but those are going to have their own associated attribute tables. How would we create? Would it be our responsibility to create those attribute tables, or is it going to be something that we give to you and you're going to populate for us, and then we build our scenarios off of that? Or how is that going to how will that affect us?
Well, so it goes both ways. So I'll give you an example. Kurt from Lincoln and Eric from Texas A&M are two of the savviest GIS guys I know. They're probably going to go in and build their own databases if they expand. If Kurt expands to downtown Lincoln, he's probably going to do it himself. We certainly are willing to help. We are certainly willing to give you pointers, whatever you want us to do. But, again, I always go back to the intention of this model was to give you the control of doing this. And so our first choice is you're building those databases, and we can help you understand how to do that. But there's always a fallback that if you need Kimley Horn or anybody here to help you, we are here to help. But that just, there are going to be different users that are going to do it different ways. And so another example, and I think Gabe's on the phone from ASU, but Gabe and I are kind of working together. We did their downtown Tempe model, and the intention is we're going to work together, he and I collaboratively, to do the downtown model for downtown Phoenix for their campus. And then once that's done, that's kind of a learning process for him to be able to go to the next one for the West Campus or the East Campus and be able to do those on his own because we've learned collaboratively. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
All right. And Gabe says I'm correct, so that's good. All right. So other folks. So I will bring up and I don't know if I've got anybody from Beverly Hills on the phone, and if I do, I apologize. But so Beverly Hills, it was an interesting development for us, and a lot of y'all, every one of them is different, but Beverly Hills didn't have land use data per se. They had a bunch of different departments that had pieces of land use data, but not everything together. And so part of our development was putting together a land use parcel shapefile that had all the information about use, square footage, values, all of those things, but from different locations. And so our intention was, we're going to do this one time, but we don't want y'all to ever have to do this again because it's a painful process. And so as we sat down with them during the training and kind of the implementation process, we talked about creative ways that they would be able to update data and opportunities to update data. And one of the things they came up with that we're going to move into development with them at some point is developing an interface for when a developer or a new business owner comes into the downtown and does a new use permit, that they have to fill out this form that basically says the new use is this, the square footage is this, so that it goes into the land use data file and updates for them automatically. So they've got the ability to go in and change as development changes. You know, I talked with Durham, and Durham, y'all are on the phone, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but we talked a couple weeks ago about the same type of process, that if you're looking at permit or building or use permits, being able to go in and use that as a catalyst for making changes to the land use data. And those kind of fall in the manual or incremental updates, but those are some opportunities where you've got other people in your community doing things. Can you pull that data and use that for updates to Park Plus? So that's me giving a spiel there. What about some of the parking data? That's one I don't know that any of us have ever talked about. But has anybody tried to update parking data in their model?
Brett, in Houston we haven't done that. We updated, I think, fees associated with parking is one thing that we did in our model. We're looking at getting an LPR here in Houston, and one of our goals in getting that LPR is to also use it for surveys, because we'll send out folks and they'll do a manual count on vehicles. Is there any progress on like importing that LPR data into it instead of manually?
Yes, there is, and it goes into. We're going to get into a second what the manual. With the manual update versus a semi-automated, and that's kind of our semi-automated, where what we're doing right now, we for those that don't know, we at Kimley Horn purchased a LPR unit from Genetec, similar to what y'all might use for parking enforcement. Well, I've got a box, and I take it, and whenever I go to a place, I'll throw it on top of a rental car, and it's just this mobile-mounted unit, and we're using it for data collection right now, where we go through and we do occupancy reads, basically how many hits we get on a license plate, and are able to pull that out tabularly. And we had to write some algorithms and some pivot tables and things like that, because the Genetec or vendor whatever software doesn't naturally pull out occupancy data. So we had to write some algorithms and whatnot. But we pull it out in a tabular fashion where it basically shows us hour by hour, lot by lot, what the occupancy is, and we've been able to bring that in and tie that to Park Plus data. And an example is, and I don't know that Sarah's on the phone, but one of our young professionals here, Sarah, went to Asheville, North Carolina a few months back and did 2 days worth of data collection with the LPR unit, and then pumped it out to a table, and then we appended that to their last updated calibration and recalibrated it for them and sent them a new data sheet. And this took all of about 2.5 days of data collection and updating. So yes, there is progress, and Maria, we're going to actually show you some of that progress when we're there with you in a few weeks, but we're writing a white paper right now that talks about some of the challenges and limitations of that as we go. So that's one of the opportunities, is using technology, and the city of Aspen's not on the call right now, but they're using T2, and they're using their Calais system and their Genetec system to pull all of these different tables that have parking occupancy data or parking use data, and we're feeding that into the model for them so that they can update that on a pretty continual basis. So yeah, that's one of the things we're trying to think about, and we're hoping to transfer that to y'all as well to be able to do those types of things as we go forward.
In Aspen, the transaction history that they're pulling from the Calais, is that to kind of infer or project occupancy moving forward? They're using the past history?
Yeah, it's past history. So right now, Park Plus, the way it works, if you think about it, is we use, I like to say current history rather than past history, because we like to pull data from yesterday and calibrate to that. But that's the kind of data we're going to use, is the number of transactions. When you start talking about the multi-space meters, it's difficult, because if it's pay by space, it's good. If it's pay and display, it's hard to figure out what the actual space by space is, but everything's at a block face level in Park Plus. So you can go through and try to figure out the number of transactions versus the capacity, and we've used that to kind of iterate what the occupancy of a block face is. So you could go in with your digital Luke machines and pull transaction data and use that to update hour-by-hour occupancies for your block face.
Okay.
So that's one of your data streams, and then, you know, in off-street, if you've got gate access, it's even easier because you can pull ingress and egress counts from those and do kind of a, this is the starting point, and then we have the ingress egress throughout the day, and we know how occupancy built and how the number of spaces utilized built and then dwindled throughout the day. So, and then if you'll notice in the conversations here, we've had Texas A&M, Lincoln, and UW all weigh in. Again, a lot of it is manual. We're pulling data from new lots or changing uses or data pulls and just manually updating, and that's what I'm going to show you next.
And Brett, this is Erin. One of the comments that Kurt had made was the frequency and how often we do pull data, and you should update your parking. Do you have a recommendation as to how often? I would assume that would be pretty dependent on the community, or if it's on a campus, different seasons and activities that are occurring that you want to capture.
Yeah, and that's good, and I'll throw that out there to the group here. I mean, I think it's location specific. So some places may only do data updates, you know, once or twice a year, where they can get a couple of different data points they look at. You know, this is what it was in the winter of 2014 versus the fall of 2014, and see what the calibrated data looks like. And that way, you're updating, you know, incrementally, and as land uses are changing, you're updating with that as well, keeping it fresh. Others, you know, some of our university clients, y'all may want to use more data as you can pump it into the model to understand the first few months of the year versus events versus spring versus fall semester versus summer semester or trimesters if you're doing that like ASU. So, you know, it all depends on what you want to evaluate, and then you need to have data to go in and plug in with that evaluation. The real problem, and I think most of y'all will echo this, is you just don't have staff to go out and do a ton of data collection all the time. So that's why I think if you do it kind of annually, you're probably going to be okay. If you have major changes in your downtown or your campus, you know, you just want to reflect that change with the updated parking behavior so you're modeling appropriately. Let's move on here to kind of the updating of data. So Erin and I are going to give you a couple of examples of updating data, and then we'll open it up for questions, and then I want to show you a couple more things before we wrap this up. So taking a look here, opening this back up. So I'm in my copy of ASU existing field or scenario. So I've copied this down. I'm going to go in and mess with the data. So let's say I want to update a handful of land uses, or I want to update a handful of parking facilities based on some new data that I have. The first step in doing that is going to be manual, just like Eric and Kurt and Matt are saying. If I go into my land uses and open the attribute table, it's just going in like it's an Excel spreadsheet and updating these values. So if I right-click and go into an edit session, it gives me an opportunity to go in. Let's just say that the Urban Systems Engineering building, which has basically 2,500 square feet of classroom for this one particular use, becomes something else. Let's say it becomes office, and they double the square footage because they're able to capture some closet and hallway space that becomes office. So we would go in and update those values, and that's really the manual update that goes along with the tangible information. Now, the other thing that you'll want to do is if you're just updating one land use, or you're changing one type of land use to look at another for a scenario, you may want to go through and make sure that your adjusted rates that are associated with that are consistent with other types. So right now, this was consistent with some of the classroom land uses that were on ASU's campus. So really high rates, high demand per square footage. We'd want to go in and find other offices and use those. So instead of using the classroom rate, I'd go in and find other offices, and maybe you want to just sort these by use type, and we could go in and find other offices that are around the area. We could go in and find other offices that are similar in terms of who's going to be using it, and just go in and adjust these adjusted rates manually to reflect the new type of use. And we typically will pick a handful of them, find an average, and update that way. Conversely, if you're updating all of your land uses with new infrastructure data from your infrastructure planning or public works or planning, you don't want to update these manually. You'll just update the fields here and the value and square footage numbers, and then go through and recalibrate the model. And when the model is recalibrated, that's when those adjusted rates will be updated along with it. And again, like Maria asked, when you recalibrate, what happens? It takes that land use and it takes the parking associated with it, and it creates generation characteristics or requirements for each land use based on how the parking operates with it. So instead of using ULI or IT or city code or some of the other archaic methods, it creates those rates for you. If you're doing a large-scale update of land use, I would recommend the next thing we're going to show you, which is kind of the semi-automatic, which is going to be a little bit easier than going through and doing manual updates line by line. Same thing when you're looking at manual updates for parking. I can go in and I can change the hourly, daily, monthly rates, the parking type, the number of spaces that are associated with it. There's no really need to update the occupancy for this unless you're going to recalibrate, because this is only used in the initial calibration process, and changing these variables will change the behavior patterns of the people that are going to use it. So if you're doing it in a scenario, you're really going to stick with these values over here. If you're updating for a recalibration, you'll do this. And again, that might be best suited for a semi-automatic update, which I'll show you here in just a second. But as an example, if you wanted to take Lot 59 North, which is this large lot up by Tempe Town Lake on the Arizona State's campus, and split that into 3 different lots that have 3 different user types, I could do that here. I could do a copy, and then I could paste it into the parking layer, and paste it again into the parking layer. And when I select this now, I'll go to just my selected features, and now I've got 3 extra layers associated with this, where I've copied basically this visitor parking, which had 95 spaces. Now I've got it in there 3 times. I can go in and make this 35, 35, and 20, and then put different user types associated with it, and it's going to change the behavior patterns on campus. So that's just incremental little manual updates you can do. So let's say, though, we're not looking at doing line-by-line, small-scale updates. What if we want to do a large-scale parcel update or a large-scale parking update? The best way to do that is to update either the parking data in the table of contents in your shapefiles here through a join, or just bringing in new data and associating it with the scenario. So I'm going to show you that first example where I'm going to bring in some new parking data that I have gone out into the field and calculated, and I've got it into a spreadsheet, and then we're going to bring it in and join it, and I'm going to show you how you would update that relatively easily rather than going in and doing line-by-line updates. So I've got a spreadsheet. Let's just say I went out and did some LPR data collection. So here in my spreadsheet, again, just like what we had in the attribute table, I've got the name, I've got the number of spaces. If I unhide this, I've got the p-type, the hourly, the daily, the monthly. And the reason I've got all this is I actually exported this out from GIS so that I had the exact same fields to work with when I updated it. And that's a good idea, to export it out as an Excel file. You export it out as a DBF, and then you'll convert it to an Excel file. But that way you're working in the same structure that is in your shapefiles. And the reason that's important is you can use these object ID fields or the name field as a unique join category and join the data up, and that way you can transfer the data relatively quickly. So I've got everything updated. I went in and calculated new parking occupancies, and so throughout the day I've got updated occupancies for campus. So I would go in back into my model, and I'm simply just going to add, go back out a little bit. So I've got my updated data spreadsheet.xls, and it asks me what I want to add. I'll just add the database layer, and if I go in and open that up, It looks just like a shapefile. It's got all of that data that I had previously in my Excel file. And all I have to do is go in, right-click on parking, join, and I'll join that database based on that object ID layer, so it's got a common nomenclature. And when I open this up, I've got, let me go back to my full table, I've got my original occupancies here, and then I've got, if I scroll all the way to the right, all the way past all the data that was originally in there, I've got that join data, and I've got new occupancies here. So I can go in and update those based on this join data. So the real simplistic way to do it, and it's still a little bit manual, that's why I call it semi-automated, but if I, let me clear my selected, if I go in and do a field calculator here, I can say that that field is now equal to, we'll go all the way down to the database at 12 p.m. So these two are relating to one another, and just update those fields. And so it'll calculate, then it updates, so the numbers have changed. Then I can do the same thing here, and I can just make that 1 p.m. So you're just making sure that these two correlate and go through. And so then instead of it being a manual process where you're updating data for hours and days on end, you can go through and do that relatively quickly. Now there are other processes, and we're testing those in Park Plus, where it's removing fields and adding new fields. We've had some difficulty with it, and so we don't necessarily recommend that yet until we can figure out the best way to streamline that process. But we're definitely working on how to make that a little bit easier than doing field calculations one by one. But that's an easier way now to do that rather than trying to go in line by line. And Eric, what do you mean by be careful with duplicated field names?
Can you hear me on the phone?
I can, yes.
Sometimes you get errors. You know, you have OCC on the line 1 p.m. For both field names. And if you're going through there and using that field calculator, sometimes it'll, if you don't confuse yourself, sometimes you can confuse the program with duplicated field names, especially if you don't, if you're using that table for other purposes in other programs or accessing it otherwise. So copy your data in the way you're doing it, the field calculator, copy your data in, and then get rid of that relate or join. Get rid of that join, so that you don't confuse other things, and make sure that you are, again, not trying to calculate itself into itself.
Right, you'll get an error with that. So, I mean, that's why,
right.
Absolutely right. When you see the field calculator, you want to say that's the original. So the name of your shapefile, whatever you've called this, and then
right.
the column, and then the name of our Excel file, which is database, and then the
right.
column associated with that. And then Eric's exactly right. When you're done and you've updated all your fields, it's best to just go in and remove that join. And so then I've just got now my original shapefile again, but these fields will stay the same with my updated values in it.
Yeah, that is a problem, especially if you're trying to serve any of that data to the website. Java has issues with that. JavaScript.
I can see that, yeah, and I will tell you, if you leave it in join, Park Plus might have some issues with it too, looking at duplicate field names, trying to figure out which one to use for your calculation. So I recommend taking the join off. Now, one of the things that Aaron and I are working on right now, and more Aaron than me, but is streamlining this process a little bit where when you want to go in and update new fields, rather than having to do that field calculation, you can simply replace these fields with the new fields from your table. But we've had some issues with it where it either doesn't take those fields out and it just hides them, and then you're not getting any updated data, or it's not recognizing the new fields. So we're kind of working through that right now, and one of the white papers we're going to put out is going to be kind of updated database management tools, and that'll be something where if we can get that figured out, we'll give you the processes to be able to do that, so you're able to do that on your own. So that's, I mean, that's really what I wanted to get into today was kind of when you're updating the data, what you're actually doing with it and where you're doing it. As I always say in the training, you're going to learn the most by doing this yourself and getting in and getting your hands dirty, but we want to give you the tools to be able to do this. So as you're doing database management, look online. This should be online within the next couple of days, where we've got this video and this conversation up as a means of starting point. And then always, let us know. Aaron and I are always available for questions if you've got them related to how we do the database management, or as you're getting into calibration and whatnot. And that's what's next. So let me I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions or thoughts before we talk about what's next?
I thought of a quick question. I'm sure it's an easy answer, but it is when you copy paste a model in. So let's say that you make copy one, paste a new one, and then you update parking stats within that new one. You still have that baseline from that old data. So from a timeline perspective, it would be original would be T1, copy is T2. If you make changes to T2, your original data, your baseline is still T1. Is there any use to really save that old T1 because it's not coming back?
There's not from a reviewing. Let's say you're updating. T1 is an update of both parking and land use information. So you're right, it's not coming back, and you're going to be using T2 from now on out to do new scenario planning and things like that. It's always good to have those old T1s, though, to go back and have as a comparison point. So if you're looking at, let's say, for example, you want to look at adjusted rates for different land uses, and you say, back when we used to have a pretty dead retail core in our downtown, this is what it looked like from adjusted rate standpoint. And now that we've got, Haymarket's opened up in Lincoln and there's a lot more vibrancy, what does it look like now from an adjusted rate standpoint or an occupancy standpoint? So it's always good to have that historic. You might want to just archive them and be able to go back to them at some point.
Okay.
All right, so with that, I've got about 9 minutes left, and what I wanted to show you in those last few minutes was just what's next for the user group. I've talked to a lot of you this year, and we're trying to point out that we're really focusing on you guys this year to make sure the information you're getting and the experience you're getting is right, to make sure that you're using Park Plus well and getting it integrated into your daily planning or monthly, whatever you're doing on campus or community. So we're spending a lot of time and focus on user group, and you've seen today we did our first Lunch and Learn. We're going to do another one, and we're going to try to do it in a month or so that there's not a lot of time between these sessions, so that you're starting to build kind of a better understanding of things. In the next one, we're going to talk about calibration, getting into the weeds in that a little bit about what some of those things are about. Some of you saw this. I think I sent the email to everybody, but we've got a user group website up, and I've gotten some logins for most of you. I think, Cade, you sent me an email, and I still owe you a login. But if you haven't gotten one yet, certainly send me your email or a generic email from your university or your community. We only need one for each community, and that'll get you access for anybody that needs it. We want to make it simple so that you've got a unique login. So as an example, Kurt's got one now that's just Lincoln, and it's got his password. And so you would get one that was Durham with their password and go in. I wanted to show you a little bit about what's on that site, really more so because we want to get your feedback about what you can use for that site. So here is the Park Plus user group webpage, and it's this is probably not the final destination for this thing. We did this through one of our company's local SharePoint sites, and the intent is we're going to get something a little more interactive for you a little bit later down the line, but we wanted to get something up that you can use. So a couple things to point out about this. On the screen, the home page, just a little intro information, but what I find might be important to you is there's a Learn More About Park Plus section over here, and there's some presentations that we've done for some of y'all at some conferences, some articles, different things that kind of give some explanatory information so that if people you're working with ask some questions about what it is, you can find it there. And then there's some introductory videos here that talk about the different processes, so calibration, projections, pricing, those types of things. And this is where you'll find the video and audio for today's conversation once we get that up there. There's also some interesting things we found on the internet that relate to what we're doing with Park Plus, so right-size parking or planning for parking and those types of things. On the left side here, you'll find that we've got to meet our staff, and so that's just all of us. And most of y'all know me and have met me, but there are a ton of us doing this here at Kimley-Horn, so reach out to any of these folks, and they can certainly help you. Some of these folks are software developers, some are practitioners like Aaron and I, but all of them know Park Plus backwards and forwards, can certainly help you. Our newsletter, which a new edition should be coming out soon, but the two from last year. And then what we want to really invite you to take a part of is this discussion board. So as you start having questions, whether it's about data management or calibration or things like that, here's a portal for y'all to be able to communicate with one another initially. And we'll monitor this and make sure that if questions get posted, they're going to the right people or they're getting answers. But there's a place here now where you can start asking, instead of asking Brett, the consultant, what he thinks about your Park Plus model, you can ask Eric, the practitioner at Texas A&M, or you can post a question and somebody from Arizona State or Durham will be able to answer the question and help you understand how they're using things. So our intention with this is it's an interactive discussion place for you, the user group, to use going forward. So that's what we've got for now. I invite you and implore you to explore it a little bit, take a look at what's on there, and if there are things that would be helpful for you in the day-to-day use of this model, do not hesitate to ask us and we'll get it up there. We just want this to be something that's another tool for you to make this a better experience as you're using Park Plus in your community. So, and again, if you don't have a login yet, certainly let me know. So then last, we've got some upcoming user group meetings. Some of y'all know about these, some of you don't, but our intention is to try to get out to the user group a little bit better so that we're reaching you and we're connecting you with people that are using it kind of regionally with you. So as an example, in a few weeks we're going to Houston. We'll be with Maria and Cynthia and Norman, and then Eric from Texas A&M is going to come over, and all of us together are going to talk a little bit about Park Plus and how it's being used and where to go next with it, and less focused on Kimley-Horn talking about it, more about how Houston and Texas A&M are using it. We're going to do a similar one up in the Northwest with UW and Washington State. We'd like to do one here in Tempe with Arizona State and Tempe, you folks in North Carolina. Some of you are kind of situated by yourself right now. You know, Kurt, that would be you and Lincoln, but we certainly don't want to leave you out. So if there's something we can do to help you with this, it doesn't have to be a regional user group meeting. We can certainly get you engaged and get you materials, and if we need to come sit with you, we can do that as well. Really focusing on making sure you're getting the most out of this. So with that, I would just say, look, this is the first one of these we've done. If you have feedback about how to make it better, there are 2 emails right there. You know mine. Also tell Aaron. We're happy to structure this any way we can to make it better for you. And feedback about website, user group, anything we can give you, let us know, and we'll make sure it gets taken care of. So with that, I thank you. If there's any other questions, we'll take them now.
Hey, Brett, this is Maria with Houston again. I just wanted to thank you and Aaron for putting this together. I think it'll be very helpful for us. We're still new users with Park Plus, so getting a community together I think is going to be very helpful for us, so I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, the good news is, Maria, is that we're all new users of Park Plus because this thing's only a couple years old, so we're all learning together. And you're welcome, and thank you for giving me the idea with the webinars we've been doing with y'all. So I hope this is going to be beneficial to everybody. Anybody else? Somebody's having fun. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Look for an invite for the next one of these soon, and I'll email you and let you know when this gets up on the site. And again, if you haven't gotten a login, let me know. There's no strings attached to that. So let me get you a login to the user group site. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brett.